So today, inflation came in at 3%, and everybody's cheering because they think rate cuts are coming and we have defeated inflation. But the former US Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers, has just dropped an absolute bombshell about inflation, and he actually thinks we are on our way to seeing Weimar hyperinflation. So what is actually the truth about inflation today? Why are markets rallying? Are they rallying sustainably? And what is all of this going to mean for Bitcoin? Well, I got a jam-packed episode for you guys today. Let's start with talking about the news and what happened, okay? So we can see here very clearly that US CPI annual inflation is down to 3%, below the expectations of 3.1%. Now, this is very pivotal because the market acts on expectations, okay? A lot of people say that's not a huge difference. We expected 3.1% and we got 3%. Who cares? Big whoop. It's a tiny 0.1% change, but it is all about expectations. And this is why the markets are rallying today, okay? Bitcoin briefly touched, I think it was $58,000. We're going to have a look at the Bitcoin charts in a moment. But let's have a look at what else happened, because we not only got CPI, but you also got core inflation. So core CPI inflation increased to 3.3%. And again, the forecast was 3.4%. So again, it is all about, what's that word? Expectations. But if you're the little guy trying to get ahead, you can see that the expectations are a little bit different to that 3% figure that gets floated in the mainstream media. And this is related to what Larry Summers recently said about inflation. We can see here. So the official government-approved figures admit that car insurance is at 19% inflation, transportation insurance, 9% inflation, hospital services, 7%, car repairs, 6%, electricity, 6%, and we all know rent and food is a whole lot higher than 5% inflation that the government is admitting. And this obviously gets us into the discussion about what is happening with inflation and what is Larry Summers talking about. Obviously, one of the most connected people in the entire world. Let's have a look at what Larry is saying, okay? Because I think Larry's an interesting man, and he recently said, again, the timing is what interests me about everything in the world today. I don't think there's any coincidences in timing anywhere. But in March, Larry Summers said that inflation actually reached 18% in 2022 using the government's very own previous formula. Okay, now this is fascinating. This is very interesting. I'm going to try to blow this article up so I can show you guys the nuggets. But he actually joined together and wrote a paper with the IMF. Interesting, don't you think? The headline writer was Larry Summers, and it's very, very interesting. In the paper, they actually look at how inflation used to be measured, and I've done a little bit of digging. I've done a little bit of summarizing for you guys, because essentially this paper was a 48-page document. So here is the announcement in Forbes. Now I'm going to take you over to the paper. If I can find it, here it is. It's a 42-page white paper. Okay, it's ridiculously long. I've been reading this for at least a week because I knew the CPI inflation data was coming out today. So I wanted to prepare for you guys. And as you can see, I'm not pulling your leg. I'm not bullshitting you. This is literally 48 pages. Look at all of the charts in this puppy. It is absolutely ridiculous, okay? There's about 100 charts. And all of it is kind of looking at inflation, how inflation used to be measured, and the signal for today, okay? So I'm not going to, we're obviously not going to read the whole thing today. We're going to go to what I think is the most important chart in this entire report, and that is this one right here. So I'm going to try my best to blow it up as big as I possibly can. Oh, what have I done here? I jumped off the tab, I think. Sorry, guys. Where are we? We're not there. Okay, maybe I've lost the tab. Well, that would suck, wouldn't it? After all that digging, after all that mucking around for you guys, I'm just going to have to reopen it up. I apologize. Okay, so download PDF. Okay, we're back. We're back. Let's blow up that chart one more time for you guys. So essentially, what the signal I want you guys to think about today is, why is former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, a man within the system, writing papers like this that is making the case that inflation today is not 3%, it's actually 8%, according to Larry Summers' very own paper here that he wrote with the IMF. So I want you guys to check out the yellow line on this chart. So the yellow line is where Larry Summers believes inflation is today. The blue line is official CPI. You can see there's a pretty big discrepancy there, don't you think? Very, very, very big discrepancy there. And we can see the peak of that yellow line actually hit 18% in 2022 when we had that massive inflation spike. And where the official CPI was 9.1, Larry's saying, actually, you know what? Your very own government is lying to you. Your very own government that I used to be a part of when I was the US Treasury of Secretary. Okay, he was essentially, what's her name? Janet Yellen, the little Yoda lady. Is that her name? Let me know in the chat, guys. I believe it's the Yoda lady. She has one of the most important jobs in the US government today. Secretary of the Treasury. Larry Summers used to be that man. So for him to come out and say, yeah, you know what? The government is lying to you today. That should cause you to ask some questions. That's all I want to encourage from today's video. Ask some questions and ask yourself. I mean, everybody knows. Okay, so Elaine has confirmed in the chat. Yellen, yeah, Yoda. Yellen is the little Yoda lady. Thank you for that, Elaine. Good to see you again. So this is interesting. This report is a little bit of a bombshell. I'm shocked that nobody has been talking about this report. Absolutely shocked. I can see why. It's 41 pages. Nobody wants to read it. And as you can see, there's a lot of charts that I had to try to get my head around. There's just charts upon charts upon charts. But I think the takeaway is you have a government employee exposing the sham of inflation, but he's not the first. There's been many other people exposing the sham of inflation. Now, what did this paper hinge upon? Where did he get 18% from? Because some people will say, but Shadow Stats has said the same thing. Shadow Stats says inflation is 18%, and Shadow Stats is a little bit bogey. Now, I agree. I've previously used Shadow Stats, and I've done a little bit of digging recently. I don't think it's as accurate as it claims to be. I do think it's more accurate and more directionally correct than the government's very own statistics. So again, I think the truth of everything is sometimes always in the middle. There's some people who say, oh no, but Shadow Stats is flawed, so we can never trust it, okay? But before I show you the signal behind Larry's, most recent bombshell paper with the IMF, I might try to show you Shadow Stats. So this is the official Shadow Stats government statistics website. They claim to measure inflation the way that the government used to measure in the 1980s. And we have had multiple revisions in the way that governments actually measure inflation since the 1980s. You have to ask yourself, why? Well, every single revision to the official government CPI reading has made the official reading of inflation lower. That's why this chart from Shadow Stats has always caught my interest, because you can see since the 1980s, the discrepancy between the blue line and the red line has only grown and grown and grown. Ask yourself why. I think that's because the government has manipulated the data every 2 or 3 years. Okay, we've had a ton of manipulations of that CPI inflation data. So, which is obviously why I think that gap has grown. We don't have time to get into the methodology today, but all we want to look at is the fact that Larry Summers isn't the only one shining a big light on how the government actually measures inflation. Okay, so now let's talk more about Larry Summers in particular, and let's do that before we talk about why I think we're actually on the trajectory to head the same way that the German mark headed in the 1920s. We're going to get to that discussion in a minute. But the reason why Larry thinks that inflation is 18%, it's a slightly different methodology than Shadow Stats. He actually made the case that because interest rates are much higher today, you need to account for that when you're measuring inflation. Okay, so most people know that the mortgage costs or the payments on a monthly mortgage have doubled over the past 2 years since interest rates were ripped from essentially 0% to 5%, which caused mortgage rates to go from 3%, a historical low, to up over 7 or 8%, depending upon where they are today. So again, this is very interesting, and this is a different methodology to what our good friends at the Shadow Stats actually did. Okay, so Larry Summers is talking about borrowing costs and interest rates. Again, it's a really interesting paper. I'd encourage you guys to read the whole thing in full. But now I want to kind of not pivot the conversation, so to say, But I want to kind of talk about what's next because our government has released some pretty shocking statistics and projections about what comes next. And I think we're going to look at them and we're going to take them at their very own word. And we're going to be looking at the data for where our governments say inflation is going to go next. Okay. Before we get there, I want to check on the chat because I could see, oh, my man Austin just sent us is that a €10 or a £10 super chat? I think it's a euro. I'm not sure. Anyway, Austin, thank you so much, dude. I really, really appreciate that. I'm always surprised at how generous you guys are on the channel. So thank you. Really appreciate that. We have David in the chat. Never on time. He's asking how much my teeth cost. That's a funny question considering I don't have the best teeth. I actually, but I have probably spent $6,000 or $7,000 on them. So 0.1 Bitcoin. Oh, that sucks, doesn't it? I've spent generational wealth on my teeth. I got some Invisalign last year. My teeth aren't even straight, which is why I'm surprised you're asking me that question, David. Okay, so I'm trying to work my way through the chat. If you guys are on Twitter, I highly recommend you jump on the YouTube chat. It is always a lot more lively than Twitter, and it just seems to work a lot better than the Twitter interface. Again, I love Twitter, which is why I stream there, because I know a lot of you guys are on Twitter. But David keeps talking about my teeth. Okay, so Phil has corrected me. The S&P 500 is down by 1%. We must have had some market movement since I last checked the charts. So you guys know I don't check the charts very often. I'm going to pull it up. I want to be 100% correct whenever we're talking about charts. Okay, have a look at this. So we have a Darth Vader candle here on the S&P 500. This happened this morning. So when the inflation data came out, we pumped by 2%, and then I don't know why, but we've apparently dumped by 1.5%. Okay, so there's obviously some market manipulation and just trading. Okay, this isn't market manipulation. This is just what happens in trading. Okay, people get too bullish. Somebody pulls the rug, and then people get too bearish, and then the opposite happens. I think the signal on this chart can be seen here when you zoom out. The S&P 500 is in what I think is a stock market melt up. Okay, I love to put this thing on the regular chart for you guys, so you can really see how bananas things have gotten on the S&P 500. And as crazy as that chart looks, something that I always like to remind you guys is that when you divide the S&P 500 by the money supply, so let's do that. Oh God, I hope I'm sharing my screen. I am sharing my screen. I think I am sharing my screens. Just making sure. Okay, so, but what's really interesting, when you divide the SPY by the money supply, you can actually see that, boy, that chart looks a little bit different, doesn't it? So what we can see here is the S&P 500 is still 19% lower than its 2001 tech bubble peak. What's going on? Why does it look like this when I chart it in dollars, up by, let's measure it since its 2000 peak, up by 270%, but it's down by 20% when I divide by the money supply. So again, this is because the money is being debased at a breakneck pace, okay? Since 2008, that's when all of the money has been funneled into the stock markets, and it's been pumped in there to keep this zombie alive, okay? So that is what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing right now in the stock markets, okay? Because a lot of people say, oh, we're going to see a stock market crash. Every single time the Fed has cut interest rates over the past 50 years, the stock markets have crashed. I do have another video prepared on that topic for you guys. And that is true. But what everybody forgets over the past 50 years is we haven't had money being injected into the markets every single time it comes down by 5 or 10%, like it's happening today. Okay, so there's a lot of people using old, outdated models saying, look, the yield curve is inverting. Look, the Fed's cutting interest rates. Historically, this means markets are going to crash. My biggest response to that, or what I think, is that markets have already crashed, okay? My base case since 2020, since I started making videos, is that we're living for a stock market melt up denominated in dollars, okay? I always encourage people to look at the denominator, okay? Because the markets have already crashed if you're measuring it in by a money supply that's not changing. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, shit. Austin's also paid a €10 super chat for Pam. Pam will try to claim both of those, I reckon. Pam probably deserves both of those, to be honest. I don't do a whole lot. I just talk shit on the camera. Pam does the thumbnails. She keeps me in line. Someone else who keeps me in line is my boy Brandon over at Green Candle. Again, after this live stream's finished, make sure you jump on over to Brandon's YouTube channel because we're going to be going live as well, talking about a lot more of the stuff that's happening in the Bitcoin space today. So we're not really going to talk about what's happening with Germany dumping their Bitcoin and a lot of the price action today on this stream. I want to talk about inflation. So if you want my thoughts on what's happening with Bitcoin, make sure you jump on over to Green Candle. As Elaine says, all channels do it. Brandon has a great Bitcoin only channel. So we always like to support Bitcoin only channels as well. And Phil says, Green Candle, you have a great podcast. So it's not just me talking up my buddy. You can see that lots of other people obviously enjoy what he's doing as well. AC says you should keep yourself in line, part of being a disciplined adult. I've never kept myself in line, my friend. I've been homeless since I was 16, and I still feel like I'm 16. So there you have it. Now let's talk a little bit more. Okay, I want to answer this question first before we do talk more about inflation and Larry Summers. Do you think we're seeing a separation of Bitcoin from the rest of the markets as its own asset class? If so, when the market crashes, we moon. So this is a really interesting question, and this touches on something else that I was going to talk about in another future live stream, and that is the correlation that Bitcoin has to equity markets. So Satwise makes a great comment. Right now, the stocks are pumping and Bitcoin's doing its own thing, which is interesting, okay? So this is the S&P 500. It's absolutely mooning right now, like mooning in a really, really big way. And if we were to look at Bitcoin, when I put this on the log chart, you guys will be able to see that we're seeing something a little bit different, okay? Let me zoom in, my chart's an absolute mess. I have lines all over it. I must have been trying to teach someone something about Bitcoin recently. Let's zoom all the way in. You can see Bitcoin's just been pretty much down only over the past couple of months, okay? Very different. So getting back to Satwise's question, Bitcoin has already decorrelated from stock markets. And I've actually never accepted the premise that Bitcoin has been correlated to the stock markets in the medium term, okay? Because when you zoom out, I mean, Bitcoin's up 500% since 2020, since the money printers were turned on 4.5 years ago. I think that's a good time frame to be looking at things because that's when I think we kind of passed this monetary event horizon. That's when it really became clear that we're living in this, globally coordinated, fiscally driven printathon. Okay, that's what we're living through, for lack of a better words. Okay, and the S&P 500 is up 100% since then, maybe less, maybe 70%, and the Nasdaq's up like 120%. Bitcoin's up 500%. So I've never accepted the premise that Bitcoin is correlated. But to Satwise's question, yes, I do think we are going to see a little bit of a decorrelation. Yes, I do think it's a possibility that, I do think it's a possibility that Bitcoin pumps when the other markets don't. Because I want to actually show you, a lot of people say, oh, that's BS, Luke. What are you talking about? Well, I'm going to show you an example. Because the markets were dumping back here in March 2023. And I want to show you what Bitcoin did in March 2023 during the banking crisis. This was the biggest banking crisis that we've seen since 2008. The size of the bankruptcies in March 2023 was bigger than what we saw in 2008. What did Bitcoin do? Bitcoin rallied by 57% in 5 weeks. Okay, I'm on the weekly candles here. You can see that this marked the very bottom for Bitcoin just before the banking crisis in March 2023, and Bitcoin ripped. It literally rallied by 55% in 5 weeks. Okay, I hope you guys can see that on the chart there. And it's something similar actually happened when the original war between Israel and Palestine broke out. Bitcoin ripped by 30% in 4 weeks. Meanwhile, the TLT, the safe haven asset of the world, the US Treasury bond, that's been the safe haven for the past 20 years, that dumped by 15%. Okay, so I've never accepted the premise that Bitcoin's correlated to markets. Obviously, it moves in a similar liquidity cycle to markets when you really zoom out. But I think, that's a big misconception. So I got we got a ton of comments here on YouTube. Again, if you guys are on Twitter, I encourage you to check out YouTube. I'd be interested how many of you guys are on Twitter and how many's on YouTube. So they change how they measure inflation to make the current administration look like they're doing a good job. Exactly right. I 100% agree with that. You're going to see more manipulation. You're going to see more effery. You're going to see more craziness as we kind of move along this chart here. So let's talk about this chart here, because I actually think where we are on this chart right here is somewhere around here, 1920 or 1921. Let me know in the chat if you guys can actually see that. I'm going to try to make it as big as possible for you guys. So I think we're at 1920, 1921. And I really do think we've kind of seen this big first wave of inflation. I actually look, that's funny. I was just reading the comments here on YouTube. Green Candle says, someone tip Luke so he can get a good haircut. That's funny. For those who don't know, I've actually cut my own hair since I was 16. That's why it's wild and terrible. I always hate going to the hairdresser. They cut it way too short. And I have such a funny looking head that when I have short hair, I just look like a total mong for about 2 weeks. I don't know if anyone knows what the word mong means. I don't know what anyone, yeah, that's an Australian word. Mong just means an idiot. I just look like an idiot. I have a funny shaped head, so with short hair I look funky. Not funky in a good way, funky in a bad way, let me tell you. So yeah, I have cut my own hair for the past 7 odd years. Austin says he's cut his hair for the past 20 years. Is it a Bitcoiner thing? Is everybody just stacking sats? Living in a van like Chico, the man in the van. If we hit 100K this year, I'll go to the barber and get the Larry thing. Oh, fuck. I shouldn't swear on the live stream. I apologize if anyone's watching this with their young ones. Let me get back on track. Why do I think we're in 1921 on this chart right here? I think the era between 1918 and 1919, that was the 2020 era. Again, this isn't a perfect map for years and dates, okay? But I think you can see that the debasement of the German mark against gold kind of corrected between 1919 and 1921, okay? It kind of went sideways here for a couple of years. And people were like, oh, this is good. We're going back to normal, baby. But then you kind of get this next big peak of inflation here in 1921. And then it goes absolutely bananas in 1922 and 1923. But this highlights the fact that nothing moves in a straight line, okay? And I actually believe Larry Summers. I believe inflation is much closer to 18% when the government said it was 9%. And I've written, well, I don't know if you guys know or not, but I'm 65,000 words deep into my first Bitcoin book. I started writing that in 2021. It's titled Bitcoin, the Economic Singularity. And I did a little bit of a case study on all of the events of hyperinflation back over the past 50 and 100 years. And it's really difficult to find what happens. Like, when does inflation go from 10% a year to 1,000% a year and actually hyperinflates? What causes it to go on this massive parabolic arc at the very end that we saw in the last 2 years for the German mark? So the German mark priced in gold literally went from 100 German marks per ounce to 100 billion in under a year. And that's absolutely crazy when you think about it, okay? So I actually think the tipping point is somewhere around 20% inflation from all of the study that you're going to see in my book. You guys get the scoop on that, or the inside word before the fact. And I think it happens somewhere around 20%. So it's really interesting that real inflation probably hit 18 to 20% in the US in 2022. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the government's own projections of where they admit inflation is going in the future. Okay, now this is the government's very own predictions of where inflation is going. You can see here, they predict it's going to over 900% of debt to GDP ratio by 2096, which is absolutely bonkers and bananas. And I think that we're really in a very interesting time post-2020 when inflation is being lost. Okay, you guys can see this chart here. I love the image too. Biden with his eyes covered. Biden's blame game. You guys can see what happens and the lies that just have been happening. In July 2021, it was transitory. In October 2021, they blamed inflation on Trump. They said, oh, maybe it's not transitory, but it's Trump's fault. November 2021, Biden blames it on the flu. Wow, wowee. January 2022, Biden blames it on the global challenge. Feb 2022, Biden then blames it on supply chains. March 2022, okay. Maybe it's not the supply chains, but it's Putin's price hike. Okay, you can see how the narrative has just changed every 3 months. Biden blames Senate Republicans. White House again calls it transitory in May 2022. And this is the signal I want you guys to take out of today. The bureaucrats, they're telling us inflation's good. They're saying it's 3%. That's brilliant. That's great. We've nearly beaten inflation. We've nearly got inflation at the point where we've got it to the point where we're stealing the perfect amount of money from you. 2% of your money every single year. We've nearly got it, okay? We're at 3% inflation. We're stealing a little bit too much of your money, but at 2%, we're going to be stealing just the right amount of your money so that you won't notice, or the general population won't notice, okay? Who, as Satwise says, this is clearly propagandist lies. Exactly. Everything that the central bank does is a propagandist lie, okay? So again, I believe that we're losing faith in the currency. I wanted to show you this graphic, not just for a laugh, it makes me laugh anyway. I don't know if you guys found it funny, but I showed it to you because I think it's highlighting the loss of trust of governments. It's showing you guys that nobody trusts governments anymore. Everybody, the more they lie, people are slowly moving away from governments and slowly saying, yeah, you know what? I don't trust the government to actually keep my money safe. I need to actually take action myself. I need to actually take action for my financial sovereignty. So again, guys, if you do want to take financial sovereignty, this is why we're such big proponents of Bitcoin. Obviously, Bitcoin is the way you become financially sovereign. If you want to become financially sovereign, again, you guys know the rules. You're not sovereign if you're holding Bitcoin on an exchange. Get that puppy off. You can put it into a hardware wallet. Go get yourself any hardware wallet you want. I got a Bitbox here with me. I got a ton of hardware wallets. I might actually show you guys my stash or my collection one day. But again, you guys can get like 5% off a Bitbox if you use promo code Luke5. Again, if you are getting a hardware wallet, please, for the love of God, take the extra step. Don't just get a hardware wallet. Make sure you also go and actually back up your Bitcoin private seed words onto titanium. Okay. So many people. And honestly, I think like we need to have a hardware wallet that also produces titanium, but all of the default, backup phrases for a hardware wallet is always on paper. You always get a piece of paper. And most people think that is safe. Most people think, oh, I've got my seed words on paper. It's backed up. It's in a hardware wallet. I'm golden. I'm good to go, baby. But we all know that is not true, okay? We all know that fire and floods will destroy your Bitcoin private seed words, which is obviously why I'm thrilled to be partnered up with StampSeed. StampSeed actually lets you literally stamp your Bitcoin private seed words into titanium. Titanium lasts fire. As you can see from the video, it doesn't matter how hot you can heat this puppy up. She's going to survive a house fire. She'll survive a flood. She'll survive a baby chewing on it. Okay, again, babies can chew on paper and your Bitcoin's gone if you lose your hardware wallet or if you even forget the pin to your hardware wallet. Okay, but if you got your Bitcoin seed words, private keys backed up on titanium, you're set. Okay, so again, you guys can get 15% off absolutely anything you want to buy from StampSeed. You can use a promo code Luke15. They're a phenomenal product. I met the guys over in BTC Prague, and I really, really like what they're doing after seeing what they do in person. Okay, so I think Chico sums it up nicely. Time for another tea party. It is time for another tea party because I can't believe that people accept, this idea of 3%, 2% inflation being a good thing. It's absolutely not a good thing. And the last little piece of nugget I wanted to show you guys before I ended today's stream was this chart right here. I think it's a phenomenal chart, and I think it helps to explain why we have seen such a big stock market rally since 2022. And we can see here, it's put out by my good friend TXMC. He's one of the best analysts in the space, even if I don't agree with his worldview of the markets. I love watching everything he does because he provides a really good alternative view of things. But we can see here, what this chart is measuring is we've just seen the fastest easing of financial conditions in 40 years, driven by Yellen tinkering with debt issuance and Powell's giddy soft pivot presser in December. Look what happened to long yields. They crashed, okay? So I might talk about this chart a little bit more in a future live stream. But with all that said, guys, I'm going to end this one here. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much to Austin. I'm sure Pam says thank you as well for that €10 super chat. And we're going to continue this party over on my buddy's YouTube channel, Green Candle Investments. So I'm going to see you guys over there in maybe about 5 or 10 minutes. Enjoy the rest.